Hi, Wes here from Rare Patient Voice. Hey, I have a special treat today. My colleague Pam Cusick and I spent the last couple days at the World Orphan Drug Congress in a place called National Harbor, right outside of Washington, D.C. Here's a program for the event. It was a terrific event. We met lots of people, both from industry, from advocacy groups, and from various companies that we look forward to working to. I thought I'd take a few minutes to go through some of the highlights from my point of view. Again, there's so many sessions, you can't go to them all, and I certainly wasn't at everything. So this is just a few things from my point of view. And certainly I was looking mostly for things that related to the patients and how we might help other folks find patients and do that. So just a snippet of what the whole conference was about. First, I should say, going into a room and when they turn the lights down and people speaking, that's not usually the best thing for me. Usually I can't keep my eyes open. So I think I did a better job here. I was able to listen to a lot of things and see, and keep my eyes open enough to see. Some of the key themes that I heard was one thing was terrific, focus on the patients. People talk about patients first. Think about the patients with a lot of the work that you do. With a lot of the biotech companies dealing with rare diseases, they're learning that they need to work with the patients, they need to focus on the patients at all stages, and everybody kept emphasizing the earlier the better in the whole process. So that was a great thing to say. There was a lot of talk about access to the drug. It doesn't do you any good to develop a terrific treatment or even cure for a drug if people can't get access to it, if they can't pay, or their insurance can't pay, or their country can't pay, whatever it might be. So that needs to be thought of all throughout the process. Another thing I thought was interesting was advocacy groups. So many leaders of advocacy groups were there, and some that had just formed small groups because they're often their child or someone close to them was suffering from a newly diagnosed rare disease, to people that are long established organizations. But one thing I noticed was a lot of them seemed to be able to learn from each other. It was terrific where one group would have gone through a lot of issues to set up a registry, and others could learn from them, for example. So that's always good to see. The other was about pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies working with the advocacy groups, and how each one could help the other and how they might work better together. I'll have a little bit more on that as I go through some of the specific sessions that I was in. Here are some great quotes that I heard out there. Somebody at one presentation said, "You can live a month without food and a week without water, but you can't live a day without hope." Another quote that made an impression on me: "Don't underestimate the power of patience and parents." Related to that, a quote was, "We shouldn't take patience for granted." You have to say amen to that. So I thought those were worth repeating. Now I'm going to briefly mention a lot of the different sessions I was able to sit in on, and just a snippet or two about them. You could probably find out more, I don't know, on the World Orphan Drug Congress. I don't know if they're publishing these, but we can find out more about them. I heard a terrific presentation by Ilan Gano of Solid Biosciences. This is a gentleman that's young son was diagnosed with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, just a horrible disease. And he has started a pharmaceutical company. It's called Solid Biosciences, and they actually have drugs in clinical trials to treat that condition. So he's really taken this and really gone a long way with it. Just terrific to hear. And they've had to work along the way with lots of different organizations and things to get them there, but it's just inspirational to hear people like that. Juliet Moretz of Premier Research is a CRO, contract research organization. She had a very interesting talk, I thought, but it was about patient-centered research when you're doing clinical trials, that there's a great need to engage patients in the trial as early as possible. Her whole theme was start at the end and work to the beginning, and then you'll realize from the very beginning you have to include patients. What's the trial protocol? You need to do qualitative. You need to do various work and learn that whole process. Somewhat parallel, interestingly, the talk right after that, it was from a couple folks from Evidera, Margaret Vernon and Kevin Marsh, and they talked about patient-centered research, engaging patients in the trial protocol, that kind of a thing. and with qual, quant, with advisory boards. So again, music to my ears when people say, talk to the patients, talk to the families, talk to them early, learn from them before you just march down a path. Annie Kennedy had a very interesting talk. She's with the Parent Project, which focuses on Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And they had great success creating a registry. It's always good to hear about that. I also thought it was interesting that, again, they didn't just figure it out themselves. They worked with the SMA, the spinal muscular atrophy folks, and they were able to learn from each other, which is what a great way to jumpstart these projects. I learned about an organization, a group that I hadn't heard of. Kimberly LeBlanc spoke from Harvard of the Undiagnosed Disease Network. What a terrific organization that is, because so many people come to us and they're not diagnosed. We don't know what to do with them, because the requests we get for patients for surveys are for those diagnosed with a certain condition. But a lot of people, there's quite, as they call the odyssey to get diagnosed, and they have a lot of interesting information on that. Lynn Parrish from Takeda is on a group called the Global Rare Disease Commission, and they have published a report on the diagnostic odyssey. I'll post the website name. It's globalrarediseasecommission.com/report. So that's of great interest, I think, to folks in the rare disease community. Interesting presentation. It was a gentleman named Stuart Bell from a company called Inceptua Medicines Access spoke, and I thought it was interesting because he introduced his talk by saying he's not known to be much of a public speaker. When he takes tests such as Myers-Briggs and such, they indicate that he should be like a lighthouse keeper or a shepherd. But he did have a marvelous job, so I thought that was interesting. But his theme, one of the key things that I took from him was as before, the need to think about patients very early in the access arena. There was a panel devoted to talking about access, and not doing all the detail, but one of the points was made I thought was very interesting. Vertex, who has some great treatments for cystic fibrosis, apparently in Ireland, they worked out an agreement to basically treat everyone for a fixed price. So the whole access, there's different options of ways to work out access to these drugs and the payment, et cetera, from country to country. I was very interested to go to a presentation from Raphael Pharmaceuticals. A gentleman named Sanjeev Luthar. I worked with Sanjeev over 10 years ago. He was at different companies back then. One was Bausch & Lomb, the eye company, if you will. We did lots of research together many years ago. Well, he's now CEO of Raphael Pharmaceuticals. They have some very promising drugs for some rare and some not so rare cancers. Burkitt's lymphoma, pancreatic cancer. They're working on things with MDS and AML. There's a lot of those categories that we're heavily involved in. They have a drug, it's called CPI 613. It's a cancer metabolism drug, and they had a wonderful presentation not only showing, these drugs are in clinical trials, so we'll have to wait to see the outcome, but how a couple of folks in the trials normally would have been gone years ago, and they're still around. Not only that, they were able to attend the presentation. Earl was there and David was there, so what better to speak about patients doing well on a drug than actually seeing them, and then they're there and they're thriving when they were given quite a short death sentence otherwise. So that was terrific to see. The other thing that was pointed out I thought was interesting, that presentation, that getting an orphan drug designation is not the difficulty. It was pointed out. Apparently 71% of those that applied obtained it. It's all the other things, getting the product to market. It's like a trial for a rare disease can take 3 to 4 years longer because it's so much more difficult to find the people and move ahead. There was quite a few roundtables, and one which particularly caught my interest was called the patient voice, so you can imagine why that caught my interest. And there were folks there from advocacy groups as well as from the pharmaceutical companies. And one of the topics of discussion was how advocacy groups can work well together with pharmaceutical companies, because they certainly have a mutual interest. The advocacy groups, how can we get treatments? How can we get them to our patients? How can we get them sooner? The pharmaceutical company want to get to the same place. But the point is they really need to talk to each other. They need to figure out what the mutual interest is. They're not always they all have other interests too that might not meet both groups' needs. One of the key points that the advocacy groups made was they need to know their value, because they do have a value. Sometimes they think they're going hat in hand to the pharma companies, please help us, please develop something. And it's like, remember that the advocacy groups have value. The pharmaceutical companies, some of them wouldn't be able to move ahead without them. So they both need each other, and they should find common interests so that they can work with that and be honest with each other about what their needs are and how they can do that. And the other thing that was clear is, even at the conference itself, how so many advocacy groups had learned from each other in sessions and just connecting with folks. If some group has gone through something, they can share that experience with another group, and they can learn from it and avoid some of the pitfalls that the first group may have run into. So that was terrific to see. One of the things that I never thought would happen, a wonderful person came up to me. Her name is Ellen Carg. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name. Ellen Cargis of Senegene. She saw me and heard me talking nearby where she happened to be sitting, and she came up and she said, "I see your videos. I love them. I learn a lot from them, and I just wanted to say hi." So I think it's the first groupie that we've had here for our Rare Patient Voice videos. But terrific. Thanks so much for the encouragement from Ellen, and we'll keep the videos coming. And then let me just conclude on the note that what I found over and over again was that many companies in the healthcare space, whether they're pharmaceutical companies, whether they're CROs, contract research organizations, whether they're advertising agencies, communication agencies, market research firms, they need and want patients. They need to talk to patients. They need to have patients. And that's where we come in. So it was gratifying to see the need across the board and meet a lot of new potential clients where we might be able to help them find patients to have them learn from. So a great World Orphan Drug Congress. I look forward to those in the future. Thanks to a great job for those folks who put it on. And on to the next conference. Thanks.